Walk in another's shoes, a cultural sense-making learning opportunity. The Sufi poet Rumi once wrote, "Speak a new language so that the world will be a new world." My interpretation of this is much like the phrase, walk in another person's shoes, in order to truly understand their viewpoint and their experience. Cultural sense making is the more academic way to describe that process. Sense making is the process by which we understand events and behaviors in our lives. This process begins with a particular viewpoint which is grounded in expectations stemming from our experiences in our own culture. Cultural sense making is the process by which people make sense of and explain culturally different behaviors. In order to accurately analyze a situation and anticipate the behavior of other actors, cultural sense-making competence is essential. A cultural sense-making learning opportunity for students enrolled in an online international politics course. This exercise has also a collaborative online international learning component in which students in an American class in SUNY Buffalo engage in a group activity with students in a Russian college class based at the University of Moscow. Instructors can assume that the students in both countries have been introduced and are familiar with collaborating on a common digital learning platform. In the study of international politics, it's essential to challenge your tendency to view the world only from your own vantage point. Students are encouraged to expand their understanding that foreign policy is made by a complex network of actors and national leaders with different worldviews. In order for us to begin to understand how international relations work and to make sense of other countries' policies and positions, we must try to look at situations from their vantage point. A perfect example of misunderstanding between two countries is the Cuban Missile Crisis, which brought the United States and the Soviet Union to the very brink of a nuclear war. These are media from both sides, from the United States headline in the New York Times and a poster from the Soviet Union, which is supporting Cuba. In 1962, the United States discovered 2 medium-range nuclear-capable missiles had been installed in Cuba by the Soviet Union. It's not surprising that they interpret this as a threat and viewed it as a potential for an attack on the United States by the Soviet Union. What we learned later, only years after the actual event, when Soviet officials released documents from what they called the Caribbean Crisis of 1962, we learned that Khrushchev actually had a completely different perspective and ambition. What Khrushchev was a Marxist-Leninist ideologue, and he believed the United States was planning a full-scale military invasion on Cuba. He thought that without American meddling, Cuban-style communism would spread naturally throughout Latin America. And he basically installed weapons in Cuba in order to protect Cuba and the growth of communism there. In addition, Khrushchev, from his own vantage point, did not understand the American political climate and process, and didn't realize that how powerful American public opinion was in pressuring the United States actually not to engage further in Cuba after the disaster of the Bay of Pigs events. So Khrushchev and Kennedy both misread each other's strategic priorities and personal motivations by ascribing to the other their own worldview. What was perceived as an act of aggression against the United States by Americans was actually intended as an act of defense on behalf of the Soviet Union, which was an ideological ally with Cuba. Had they both known this about the other, they would not have probably gotten to the point of tension that they did. So what we're going to do with this learning opportunity is our own exploration of contemporary events and leaders. We're going to start by looking at PBS Frontline documentary called Putin's Revenge. Here's a preview.
That's eating away at Vladimir Putin.
The FBI detected more attempts. Russian hackers are behind those attacks.
America in the crosshairs.
This is the first time they have gone out and weaponized that information.
He's going to employ whatever means he can to undermine the United States.
Tonight on Frontline, in a special two-part investigation, the epic inside story of Putin's revenge.
Okay, so then in teams of 3 or 4 composed of Russian and American students, you will discuss the documentary. The next stage of this is to do your own research. So you'll stay in your same teams, and students will choose a contemporary foreign leader that interests them and research the factors that may influence that leader's worldview. And finally, each team will write up a briefing that offers analysis of their leader, his or her worldview of particular events, which you will then post in the assignment's online discussion forum, and where classmates will respond to each other's posts with questions and feedback. The learning outcome for this opportunity is that we'll give students the opportunity to consider the reality that in international politics and in life, different actors can see things differently, and that trying to interpret these perspectives will be advantageous in our overall understanding of a given situation. Students may also learn to look more critically at news coverage of international relations and have a more nuanced understanding of how this realm works. And finally, this understanding may also trickle into their daily lives and enable them to better understand others who appear to behave irrationally from their vantage point. Thank you, and if you have any questions, I'm available.